Wow. What a beautiful thing to see. I wanted to quickly tell you how it appears as though patriotism is on the rise in the wake of this attack. Walmart is now saying it sold 450,000 American flags between Tuesday and Thursday. And Kmart is reporting that it has sold some 2,000 flags since Tuesday and that many of its stores are simply out of stock right now. Our coverage takes a short pause and we'll rejoin you in a moment or two. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Paula Zahn reporting from New York this morning. You are looking at the rescue area where efforts are underway. Rescue workers there not giving up hope. They might find someone trapped in the rubble, although we are told they have seen no signs of life in the last 3 days. Tons and tons of debris successfully moved out of this area. Tons more to go. City workers working around the clock, many working 24 hours straight and then off 24 hours. Stories of firefighters actually getting an hour of sleep by putting cots on sidewalks as debris continues to follow from adjoining buildings. And as we look at this skyline shot again, it is interesting to note that even though smoke still billows from the crash site, for the very first time you can actually make out some of the buildings that are south of where the World Trade Center once stood. We've got a lot of support here this morning, correspondents all over the world, help in major capitals. Bill Hemmer, as you've seen throughout the morning, will rejoin us from Jacob Javits Center, where he is in the middle of a crush of people who want to volunteer their services. Also joining me from Washington at the White House is senior White House correspondent John King. Actually, he's high above a platform there with a beautiful view of the Capitol this morning. And Miles O'Brien will also be with us throughout the morning from Atlanta. At this hour, I wanted to bring you very quickly up to date on the latest developments in America's new war. The FBI has arrested what they call a material witness in Tuesday's attack. He is one of the people detained at JFK Airport on Thursday. And CNN is told 2 men who have detailed knowledge of the terrorist network were taken into custody in Texas. They are on their way from New York to New York for more questioning. Authorities say the 2 men are moving the investigation forward. Meanwhile, the cockpit voice recorder has been recovered from the crash site of United Airlines Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. It was buried where the plane went down Tuesday near Shanksville. It is on its way to the NTSB in Washington for analysis. Investigators hope it will reveal exactly what the hijackers intended to do and what was said in the final minutes of the flight. Meanwhile, Congress has given President Bush authority to wage a worldwide war on terrorists. Use of force resolution was okayed with only 1 dissenting vote from Representative Barbara Lee of California. Congress also approved $40 billion to fund the war against terrorists and to clean up and rebuild the damage from Tuesday's attacks. And perhaps there's no one other than Martin Savage this morning who can give us a better idea of what these rescue workers confront at Ground Zero. Martin, good morning. What have you seen? What can we expect later today?
Well, good morning to you, Paula. We're at the intersection of Reed and Greenwich Streets. This continues to be a major artery for the rescue operation that is underway. Support personnel going in, equipment going in as well. And the figures that are now starting to come out as we expected are staggering. They are right now saying that the official death toll stands at 185. However, there are 4,717 people that have officially been reported as missing. On top of that, authorities say that there has been some 13,000 tons of debris that has been hauled away in 1,400 trucks, and they admit that is merely scratching the surface. They say only now really have they begun working around the perimeter of the debris field. There is still a great deal more that needs to be gone over. In the background you may see, and probably from where you are, the vantage point, that smoke continues to rise above the New York City skyline where those Twin Towers once did. You may be surprised to know that it is still burning. They're still putting water on that debris field. What is it that's burning? Fire experts say it's a number of things. It's a combination of jet fuel. It is also a combination that everything that was in those two buildings is still in those two buildings, however, greatly compacted under a lot of pressure. And it's that pressure that is allowing the fires to burn very slowly and very hot. A lot of things are melting inside of there. We're also hearing that the organization is becoming much better. One thing to point out, that when it comes to the rescue operation, the search for survivors, this is going to become less and less a volunteer effort, specifically on that site, and more a job that'll be handed over to the professionals. The volunteers are needed. They have a very specific role in helping supporting the effort. But more and more of the work down there at the site and the search is going to be done by professionals. And also they have brought in a special team from the southwestern part of the United States. This is a team that is accustomed to dealing with the wildfires out west, used to dealing with huge crowds of professional firefighters. They're setting up showers mainly for the emergency workers, and they expect on Sunday to open up the kitchens and begin serving meals for the professionals that are here. They estimate that they will be serving about 6,000 meals a day. We started with numbers. We'll finish with one other disturbing number. On average in the city of New York, before all of this, they would get, usually authorities say, about 6 bomb threats a day. Since Tuesday, that number has skyrocketed to, on average, about 100 bomb threats a day. They warn anyone who makes a false report could face federal charges. Those charges, by the way, are a $250,000 fine and up to 10 years in prison. Paula.
Martin, Bill Hemmer has been interviewing people all morning long who have been lined up for 3 days to volunteer in some way. You've made it clear that in some of these more dangerous areas, their help cannot be used, but you said that the city could use them in a supporting role. What specifically does the city need from these thousands and thousands of people who are willing to stand there for 3 days in a row to pitch in?
Well, it's really, where do you begin to try to tell? There's all sorts of things that need to be done. The delivery of food, the delivery of supplies into the rescue area, into the work site specifically, helping to clean up, helping to serve meals, helping to perhaps provide first aid and comfort to the rescue workers out there. It's still a dirty and difficult job for them. There are many areas in which volunteers are needed. And keep in mind now,
okay, Kathy, tell them to hold the rubble pictures.
As money comes around, these workers are going to be going back, those volunteers that have been working so far. So it's like a new shift change that needs to come in of volunteers. They're still needed here. Paula.
Martin, thanks so much for that update. Once again, we're going to try to give you a close-up look now at what the rescue operation looks like at this hour. Cranes and bulldozers are picking away some of the heaviest pieces of what is left of the World Trade Center, but other work is being done on a much smaller scale. You actually have rescuers down there with plastic pails who are toiling in the muck, and hundreds of volunteers continue to slosh through the tons of rubble. I think we mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again that already 10,000 tons of rubble have been removed. Unfortunately, though, after another day of effort, no new survivors have been found. 124 bodies recovered, with 59 identified, more than 4,700 people missing. Among those are the husband of Wendy Doremus, who joins me now. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Your husband was a photojournalist. Was he on duty?
Photojournalist.
Yes, he's a photojournalist. I know you still hold hope.
Yes, I do.
And you have good reason. I have the city officials you've spoken with say there is still a chance your husband could be alive.
There's a number of people that have not been identified. He was down there. I spoke to him on Tuesday morning at 10:15, and he said he was safe. He was with the firemen, and I was supposed to meet him at his studio in 20 minutes. I haven't heard from him since. I did hear from, he said he was with the firemen, and I've been passing his photo, a copy of his photo, to everyone, and somebody called me on Wednesday evening and said he had seen my husband trying to get back down there. Could be amnesia because he's not listed anywhere so far among the survivors.
Put this into context for this morning. Is his studio downtown, not far from the World Trade Center? What was he doing downtown?
We live downtown. He's a photojournalist. He saw the smoke and he went to the story.
That would be his natural instinct.
That would
We're
be
gonna,
his natural
as you
instinct. He
talk,
left about 9 a.m.
we're going to show pictures that
Okay.
your husband has taken throughout his career. So he has worked in many dangerous situations before.
Yes.
Give us an idea of what he's confronted on the job.
He was at the Berlin Wall. He was at Gaza Strip during the Intifada. He's been in Northern Ireland. He does locally floods, disasters, airplane crashes. He knows how to go to a story. I wouldn't think he'd be foolish and go beyond it.
He knows how to exercise caution.
Yes.
Okay, so the phone call came through at 10:15, which means what? By that time, Tower 1 had collapsed?
Actually, I was trying to get him on his cell phone, and I had seen the first tower fall. And I called him and told him, I said, Bill, the first tower has fallen. I heard on the news that the Pentagon had also been hit, so it wasn't just a plane crash. It wasn't just an accident. I told that to him. He said he was safe with the firemen, and he would meet me at his studio in 20 minutes.
Before we go any further, I wanted to put up on the screen now a picture that he had actually taken of the World Trade Center before this horrific attack. When was this taken?
This was some years ago. He's an avid sailor. We sailed the Hudson, and on his sailboat he took this one sunny summer afternoon.
Now, at the time that your husband called you, or you had this conversation, and he said he was safe with firefighters, do you know his exact location?
I did not ask him. He did not tell me.
Did he give you enough information about what he had seen to help you better determine where he was?
No, he didn't tell me anything. I heard a little bit of coughing at the end of the conversation, but it didn't sound as if he was in the middle of the rubble.
And once again, we're going to put up a close-up picture of your husband, and this is something that CNN.com would like everybody to do who is missing a family member, because if you log onto that website and you download a picture, we are hoping that doctors and nurses and triage folks who perhaps have seen some of these victims will be able to link up with family members like you.
I've been trying to get his photograph everywhere in the city so that somebody might recognize him and call.
What have you done to find him?
I have gone to St. Vincent's has the comprehensive list of all the patients in the city hospitals. I have faxed his photo, his press photo, to all the major agencies. I've talked to the Photo District News. I've talked to all his press friends, trying to get his photo around. I have gone to all the fire departments that I've been reading about that were down there and trying to give his photo to the firemen. And as I said, somebody called me on Wednesday.
You described your husband as a very cautious and sensible man because of what he has faced on the job before. Based on what you told him about the first tower going, do you think that was enough of a warning to him to get out of there?
I think so. He didn't sound as if he was in danger. He does have two, teenage kids, and I know he wouldn't put himself in danger needlessly to get the story. He tries to get to the story, tell the story, but I don't think he would try to go beyond it.
Other than looking at the master list that St. Vincent's has, and I should explain to those of you who don't live in New York City, that is the hospital where most of the patients were initially transported because it's the closest.
Although I hear that in New Jersey, a lot of the patients, the first people who were injured were taken to New Jersey by ferry because it was a faster way to evacuate. And I have had very little information from New Jersey. I have friends who live there who have connections, and I'm hoping to get there and find out.
We've heard these heartbreaking stories from other people we've interviewed over the last several days. They've told us they literally have gone from hospital to hospital in New York City to try to track down their loved ones.
Right.
Do you need to do that now, or do you think you have enough contacts in these other areas?
I'm hoping. I don't want to hinder the rescue efforts of the doctors and the nurses, so I don't want to go into the hospitals. I've been trying to go to whatever centers there are and work through the press.
You seem hopeful. You seem very determined. Give us a closing thought of this nightmare that you are living through, and that thousands and thousands of other folks all over the world are living through this bizarre state of limbo.
It is a horrendous situation. We've always been New Yorkers. I love New York. This will not stop this country or this city. And I'm just hoping that everybody can work together, and they have been marvelous throughout. They're so cooperative, all the volunteers, and I know we're going to get through this, and I'm going to find my husband.
And the truth is, you probably have more reason to have hope, because you had that conversation at 10:15.
At 10:15, and if he wasn't in the rubble of the first building, he has to have been smart enough to leave. So we're just all looking for him.
Well,
and any help anybody could give us would be
our
greatly
thoughts
appreciated.
are with you, Wendy. Good luck. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
your story this morning. Time to go back to Washington, D.C., which is exactly where we find John King again this morning. John?
Thank you, Paula. You will remember, our viewers will remember, one of the reasons former President Bush so successful in building the international coalition to fight Saddam Hussein and the Persian Gulf War more than 10 years ago was strong support from moderate Arab nations. That could prove critical as well this time as the current President Bush tries to build an international coalition to fight terrorism. We are fortunate to be joined this morning live in Cairo, Egypt, by Mr. Amr Moussa, longtime Foreign Minister of Egypt, now the General Secretary of the Arab League. Good day to you, sir. Let me start with the simple question. Will the Arab nations, including your home of Egypt and a key country, Saudi Arabia, stand with President Bush if he launches military strikes against Afghanistan and the bin Laden organization?
Well, thank you very much. The Arab nations do stand with President Bush, with the United States, with all other countries against international terrorism. We are very clear in our position that we do reject any international crime of terrorism against anywhere, and in particular what happened a couple of days ago against the United States. We do understand and appreciate the stand taken by President Bush that the United States will not let go after what happened. That we do understand and appreciate. But what could be done and what should be done, we stand ready to listen, to hear, to be consulted. And until now, we don't have the contact or the consultations on what will be done. That is one. Two, we listened carefully to what Secretary of State Powell has said the other day about actions to be taken by the U.S. Against terrorism. And he called the all-out war, and not necessarily military, but also economic, diplomatic, political, financial, juridical, etc. I believe this kind of definition is very important, and we stand ready to cooperate after proper consultations on what would be the action to come.
Let me follow up on that point, sir. We are told by sources that in his conversation with Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia the other day, President Bush was quite blunt in asking for the support of Saudi Arabia, and we understand he wants it from other Arab nations as well, but Saudi Arabia perhaps the key in cutting off financial support, any financial support to Mr. bin Laden in his organization, and also asking for Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations to take a tougher stand against the Taliban government in Afghanistan. Do you believe that Saudi Arabia and others will do that? And as you answer, sir, do you believe that there is leverage to do so, that there are significant resources in the Arab world that could isolate Mr. bin Laden?
Well, Mr. bin Laden is not, does not represent the Arab societies or Arab people in whatever he does. We do condemn any terroristic activities that Mr. bin Laden would undertake or has undertaken. Therefore, the actions referred to by Mr. Powell as to take actions on the financial side, on the economic side, on the diplomatic and political will always be welcomed, provided that we understand and know exactly what kind of actions are going to be taken. But certainly, I agree with you that to dry up the sources of support of any terrorist groups should be done.
Sir, I know in your conversation with Secretary of State Powell earlier in the week, you raised a concern. You were worried that because many of the suspect hijackers here are of Arab descent, that there would be some violence against Arab Americans here in the United States. You asked the administration to speak out forcefully against that. Are you satisfied the administration has done that, sir?
I'm in fact satisfied, very much satisfied with what Colin Powell has told me, that this is the stand to be taken by the administration, and that President Bush and himself and others in the administration have undertaken to protect or to stand firm against any action on ethnic grounds. America is the collection of so many people from different origins. So we believe that Arab Americans, like Irish Americans, like Hispanics, like all others, do stand firm as Americans against what happened to their country. We do sympathize with
sir,
that.
I need to stop you there, unfortunately. Sir, I'm sorry, we need to end the interview there. We're losing our satellite time to Cairo, Egypt. My apologies to Mr. Musa. We appreciate his thoughts, though, on this continuing crisis. Now for more to Miles O'Brien in Atlanta.
Thank you very much, John. We've been reporting all morning about the widening investigation into those responsible for this attack. 19 suspected hijackers now been confirmed by the FBI on board those 4 aircraft, and all of them with either direct or indirect ties to Osama bin Laden. So suspect number 1 remains very high on the list as the FBI continues this investigation. Other agencies all around the globe conducting the investigation. What makes this an unusual criminal investigation is the end result of their effort might in fact be military action rather than something that happens in a court of law. Joining us to talk a little bit about that is General Wesley Clark, the former commander of NATO. Thanks for being with us. He's now our analyst. General Clark, when you talk about Osama bin Laden as suspect number 1, his whereabouts are not known for certain. He has, we're told by intelligence sources, at least a dozen camps just within Afghanistan designed to train terrorists. As a military person, when you're presented with that objective, what goes through your mind?
Well, we have to ask, what really is the objective? Is it to strike a blow, or is it to really take apart the organization? Maybe it's first to strike a blow and keep it off balance. So it's, what's the objective? Where do we strike? When and how? So where is a number of different camps? We'd like to get specific information of what might be there and whether there are innocent people in there or whether it's just fighters.
Now, as we take a look at a map of the region, you've got Afghanistan, obviously, where we think Osama bin Laden is.
That's right.
But it's important that the neighbors are in somehow reckoned with one way or another. And as it stands right now, the focus seems to be on Pakistan. Why don't you explain that dynamic for a moment?
Well, as you look at the region, the access from the sea to Afghanistan is blocked by Pakistan. Afghanistan is a completely landlocked country. On the south and the northeast, southeast Pakistan. On the west, Iran. And so if we're going to get access to this country, we could come in from the north, we could come in from the northeast, or we could come in south or from the west. We've talked to all of the leaders in this area. We've heard some rather hostile statements from Iran. We know that Pakistan is under threat, and Musharraf has some major domestic difficulties when he takes a move in this. And so there's a diplomatic effort being worked right now to help Musharraf or assist him in making the choice to cooperate with us. It would be ideal to be able to have the support, full support and full cooperation of Pakistan. But we know that won't be easy. Then, inside Afghanistan, we've got to find the targets and figure out how to strike them.
A lot of big ifs, a lot of big questions to answer, but implicit in your discussion here when you talk about going through countries is that this is not going to be a Persian Gulf War type of scenario. This is going to be something that one way or another involves putting U.S. troops on the ground. Explain what the options are. I mean, immediately people might think of a D-Day type of invasion. That might not be the way to go.
Well, that certainly won't be the first way to go because it's a very difficult place to get to, and the objective is not the country. The objective is the terrorist network. So we want to locate the individuals who are behind it and what they need to support themselves and take that out. It may not be necessary to go to Afghanistan because there may be nodes that are cells that are in other countries that could also damage it. But if it is necessary to go there, we could go with cruise missiles or aircraft. We could send in special strike teams of special forces. We could use local people to go in and get them. And so there are various courses of action. I'm sure our military is working those courses of action right now. Let's
look at that wider view of the region here for just a moment. And in that wider view, the reason we highlight Diego Garcia is there's a U.S. base there. That's the ground base. Of course, you can put some aircraft carriers nearby. Are we limited, though, by this issue of Afghanistan being such an isolated nation? Does that limit the U.S. options?
I'm not sure that it limits the options so much as it makes them much more complicated. We've got to either trespass on or use with the permission the soil or airspace of neighboring countries. And that always adds a complicating factor, as we found in the Kosovo operation.
Give us a sense of the distances there. Diego Garcia, now that island there where there is a U.S. air base is well within the range, certainly, of something like a B-52.
This is 400 miles, and so up here is well over 1,000 miles into Afghanistan. It's well within the range of our long-range strike aircraft. We can position them there. We can put aircraft carriers out in the Arabian Sea. We've got forces now around the Persian Gulf area, and more can be brought in there.
And we still have forces on the ground in Saudi Arabia, correct?
We do. We have forces in the Persian Gulf area, not only in Saudi Arabia, but also in Kuwait.
The political realities of that, though, launching an attack, potentially, from an Arab country on potentially Afghanistan.
It will have consequences.
Yeah.
Domestic consequences for that country and international repercussions as well. So.
Let me ask you this. As a military planner, oftentimes the political realities get involved in these decisions. How much will the desire to do something quickly to answer a political need infiltrate the military decision-making, do you think?
Well, I don't think it'll be in the military piece, but it will certainly figure in the calculus of the President and the Secretary of Defense, because we've got to keep our country together and move forward in a way that brings us to the long-term objective. On the other hand, we don't want to do anything that's self-defeating. So my guess is there'll be a kind of a nagging sense of urgency, but we're going to give enough time to line up the diplomatic pieces first before we do what's necessary or feasible militarily.
General Wesley Clark, thanks for giving us that good overview of the region and the options that lie ahead. General Clark is our military analyst, obviously former commander of NATO. Let's turn it now to CNN's Bob Franken, who's been standing by at the Pentagon ever since American Flight 77 crashed into it. He's inside this morning and has more for us there. Bob?
Well, the big news right now is the call-up of the reserves. As you know, President Bush has authorized the call-up of 50,000 of American reservists, U.S. reservists, including National Guard and reserve units from all the various services. The ones specifically that are designated have not been determined yet. Each service will decide how to fill its particular part of the operation, and then in the days to come will notify the individual units and sometimes individual members of those units that they have been the ones who have been called up or at this moment have not been called up. Of course, even the latter is not a complete elimination of the possibility. There is always a possibility that there will be other call-ups if this extends, as many people predict that it will. This being this new war on terror that has been declared in effect by the leaders of the United States. As for the Pentagon itself, the target of that plane that collided, it is still involved in the massive cleanup that is going to continue for quite a while. The big effort now is to try and make sure that the area that was hit by the plane does not collapse. The final repair of the Pentagon, we're told by officials, could take several years and cost well over $100 million. Miles?
All right, CNN's Bob Franken at the Pentagon. We should point out as well the cockpit voice recorder from that flight was recovered. However, investigators are concerned that it was damaged so heavily that they may not be able to recover any information from it. It has been sent to the manufacturer, where specialists will take a look at it and hopefully capture the last 30 minutes of conversation in the cockpit, assuming it was working at the time. From the Pentagon, we take it back to New York, where the careful, excruciating efforts in the rubble of the World Trade Center continue. Paula?
And Miles, it's much worse than any of us thought when you hear these stories about these rescue workers down there and the sludge and, you know, the horrible smells coming from the site and you know, forget the work the cranes are doing. They're actually taking pails and using their hands to recover some of what is left of the towers. We've talked so much about the generosity of the American spirit that has been so greatly exhibited over the last several days. It's interesting to note that the nation's largest corporations now have pledged more than $100 million to relief efforts since the disaster on Tuesday. Among those contributing $10 million apiece, Daimler Chrysler, Pfizer, AT&T, Microsoft, General Electric, 3 oil companies, Texaco, Chevron, Amerada Hess, have pledged $5 million each. Our parent company, AOL Time Warner, said yesterday that it would give a total of $5 million to 6 different relief groups. And I think in one of the most encouraging signs of all, as of yesterday morning, users of its internet service, America Online, have now donated an additional $6 million. Right now, we're going to pause to take a look at a tribute to so many of those lives that were wiped out in these multiple attacks. Frank Sesno has more.
Lost on American Flight 11 from Boston, headed to Los Angeles. Carol Bouchard, an emergency room secretary. She was on her way to Las Vegas with her friend Renee Newell. Renee worked for the airline and gave Carol a buddy pass so the two could vacation together. Tara Creamer was on a business trip to Los Angeles and worried about leaving her 2 children, Colin, 4, and Nora, 1. Her husband, John, called her a kind and loving wife and mother. 71-year-old Thelma Cusinella was on her way to visit older sister Grace and her brother-in-law in Los Angeles. Thelma did not get to see her sister often and was overjoyed when her daughter found her a discount cross-country fare. Nellie Casey was on her first business trip since coming back from a 6-month maternity leave. She would have celebrated her 5th wedding anniversary with husband Michael on September 21st. Linda George, 27, was on a buying trip for an apparel company. She and her fiancé were planning their wedding. It was scheduled for next month. American Flight 11 crashed into the World Trade Center at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time on September 11th, 2001.
You know, we've heard so many stories from our reporters and our bookers out in the field, and I thought I'd share one with you now that'll give you an even better idea of how people are responding to this crisis here. Stephanie Ginkin went into the field, and she caught up with a rabbi who was presiding over a grief counseling service at the Piera Hotel. And in particular, counseling the relatives of the victims of Cantor Fitzgerald, a bond firm, which was literally wiped out by this tragedy. And he said the scene there was dramatic. They obviously would not allow cameras in there. And he said that there was one story in particular that hit him. A woman stood up in the memorial and said, "I lost my husband. I have nothing. I don't even know how I will be able to pay the rent." And the rabbi said he and others vowed to put a collection box in every single grocery store in New York City and ask for any kind of help they could get for her, a nickel, a quarter, a dollar, to help this woman pay her rent. He said he was looking into other ways to raise funds for her as well. So just another reminder, Miles, of what folks are doing here to help those whose lives have been forever changed and destroyed in many ways by what this happened. Miles, I thought you might be interested in one little point that we just got from the city, from the Office of Emergency Management, which is actually saying they are getting so much response from New Yorkers that they're saying we can't handle anymore. The system is working. We appreciate your help. But because of the logistics downtown and how confined the staging areas are, they're actually telling people stay at home.
And the blood banks are full, we're told, as well. It's good to hear all of that. Let's check the latest developments as we continue our coverage on the attacks on America. Crews working at the site of the World Trade Center in New York did not find any survivors under the tons of debris overnight. There are 185 confirmed deaths now, but more than 4,700 people on the confirmed list of missing. The first arrest has been made in connection with Tuesday's terror attack investigation. The Justice Department telling us the individual in question is a material witness in the investigation and is one of the people who you'll recall was detained at JFK International Airport on Thursday, prompting the shutdown of that airport. In addition, in Europe on Thursday, 2 men were charged, or actually they were charged yesterday in Brussels for allegedly planning an attack on American interests in Europe. So the Justice Department has been telling us there are concerns of additional attacks, And there are further arrests and further investigations. In addition, the Justice Department has about 100 people there watching right now in the wake of these attacks. At the U.S. Capitol, Congress passed a resolution authorizing the president to use force against those responsible for the attacks on America. Federal authorities say the cockpit voice recorder has been recovered from that jet that crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. You recall the flight data recorder, which handles the situation of where the aircraft was already recovered. That cockpit voice recorder is being sent to Washington for analysis. It captures the last 30 minutes of conversation inside the cockpit, assuming it was operating. And finally, Logan International Airport has reopened 4 days after terrorists hijacked 2 of the planes at the airport. We've been going through the grim details of those 4 harrowing flights since this attack occurred on Tuesday. Some of the details are tough to handle. Some of them are, quite frankly, were mystifying to us. And we've put them all together in a piece for you which takes us inside the 4 flights involved in this attack. It is Tuesday morning over America, and the skies are crowded as ever. More than 4,500 flights are in the air. A typical day, or so this FAA radar replay implies. The seats filled with salesmen on their way to a big presentation, students headed home, families to Disney. But somewhere in this dizzying, disorienting field of blue, 19 passengers sat in their seats on 4 separate flights, reviewing a sinister, synchronized plan that would change aviation, change America forever. No, it was not a typical morning, and there was at least one subtle clue. 2 Arab friends who insisted on sitting far apart on a nearly empty plane. Odd, thought an airline employee. Odd indeed. Boston's Logan Airport, Terminal B, Gate 26. American Airlines Captain John Ogonowski gave the signal to push back his Boeing 767. Flight 11 was bound for Los Angeles. This father of 3 and part-time farmer had just celebrated his 52nd birthday. Gate 19, the next terminal, 22-year-old Lisa Frost and 64 others boarded another LA-bound 767. United Airlines Flight 175. Lisa was headed home to celebrate her recent college graduation, number 1 in her class. American 11 taxied ahead of United 175 to the active runway. They were both airborne by 8:15. No one knew that among the seated passengers there were hijackers, 5 men on each flight, ready to take control of the planes. Here's how it all unfolded, according to this computer replay of the FAA radar information. American Flight 11 took off out of Boston and flew due west across Massachusetts and into upstate New York. United 175 flew southwesterly across Connecticut. About 20 minutes into both flights, things changed drastically. American 11 turned due south very sharply. United 175 also went off course toward New York. At about the same time, the transponders on both aircraft were turned off. That's a crucial device which sends important information and adds it on to the radar blip which controllers see. Things like the type of aircraft and, most importantly, the altitude. When flight controllers in FAA radar rooms in New Hampshire and New York saw this, they immediately surmised it was a hijacking. They also assumed it would end like other hijackings, at an airport. So they concentrated on keeping other planes away from the wayward flights. They tried repeatedly to contact the crew on the radio, to no avail. Just as Flight 11 took its ominous turn, another American Airlines plane, a 757, departs out of Washington's Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles. CNN has learned that as the passengers began to board, an American Airlines employee struck up a conversation with 2 Arab male passengers who said they were friends. One of them had a first-class boarding pass for seat number 2B, the other in coach. The American Airlines employee asked, "Why don't you guys sit together?" She felt that was odd. It was. Those 2 men had been named by the FBI as 2 of the 5 hijackers, including Nani Hajur, who is believed to have been trained as a pilot. Also on the flight, a group of school children on a field trip, a husband and wife flight attendant team, and noted attorney Barbara Olson. Nothing seemed amiss until 4 hijackers armed with knives took control of the aircraft.
It's a frangible piece of material. It is not designed to keep people out that are determined, much less a group of individuals. So a group of determined individuals are going to be able to assault the cockpit and gain entry with the current door.
8:29 a.m. American Flight 11 remains in serious trouble and has a new course, the Twin Towers in New York City. But Captain Oganowski tries to signal air controllers of his plane's fate by keeping a microphone open for those on the ground to hear. The hijackers have stabbed several flight attendants, but not before one of them can phone American's headquarters back in Dallas. The plane drops to below 1,000 feet, speeding closer to its target. 3 flights, 14 hijackers, and the drama in the sky still isn't over. There is a 4th flight, United Airlines Flight 93, a 757 which took off from Newark, New Jersey at 8:44 in the morning, bound for San Francisco with 35 passengers and crew, among them 4 hijackers. As it becomes airborne, American Airlines Flight 11, the first flight out of Boston, is only a minute away from striking the first tower of the World Trade Center. Meanwhile, United 175 is not far behind. It flies to the south and then over New York Harbor, taking aim at the South Tower. It was 8:45, only 20 minutes after controllers realized it was hijacked. American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into the northern tower of the World Trade Center.
You have to remember, these guys were not trying to land these things in a crosswind, on a short runway, in inclement weather. They were going after big targets.
On United Flight 175, passengers begin to make phone calls to their loved ones. Shortly before 9 a.m., 12 minutes after American Flight 11 has impacted, United 175 is set for a collision course with the southern tower of the World Trade Center. Meanwhile, according to one family member, on United 93, the hijackers, who had bought first-class tickets, reportedly told the passengers they were going to die and to call their loved ones to say goodbye. 31-year-old Jeremy Glick called his wife. Staying on the line as long as he could, Glick told his wife a flight attendant had been stabbed and that the 4 hijackers had moved them to the back of the plane. Tom Burnett also called his wife. The 38-year-old executive told her the male passengers had taken a vote and were not going to give up, despite the bloodshed on board by their attackers.
Said they've already knifed a guy. They're saying they have a bomb. Please call the authorities.
When Glick's family confirmed what another passenger had heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the terrorists. At 9:03 a.m., 48 minutes after takeoff, United Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. "22 minutes later, at 9:25 a.m., there is violence on American Airlines Flight 77. Passenger Barbara Olson calls her husband, Solicitor General Ted Olson, from the back of the plane. While huddled with the other passengers, she told her husband the 5 hijackers had knives and box cutters and had taken the pilot out of the cockpit. Once again, the transponder was turned off, so the radar information is somewhat misleading. But controllers believe that the plane didn't stray far from the Washington airspace, flying around the area and flirting with the restricted airspace near the Capitol and the White House. About 40 minutes after the last collision at the World Trade Center, American Flight 77 was headed directly toward the Pentagon. Meanwhile, United Flight 93 was still on course toward San Francisco, and right as it got toward Cleveland, it made a sudden course change, a 180. Its transponder went off at about the same time, and this flight was headed directly toward Washington. At 9:45, American Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. 3 downed planes, and as United 93 headed east, air traffic controllers watching the flight reported they could hear screaming over the cockpit radio. One voice yelling repeatedly, "Get out of here." And then later, an accented voice apparently making a public address announcement to the passengers telling them, "There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." By 10:10 a.m., it was all over. An hour and 15 minutes after United Flight 93 departed Newark Airport, shortly after the men had voted to attack the terrorists, the 757 crashed in a remote cornfield in rural Pennsylvania. When it became clear these were not conventional hijackings with tense but safe landings and instead suicide missions, the FAA took some unprecedented action. It grounded all flights on the ground that had not departed and ordered flights in the air to land immediately. It's an amazing sight to watch the radar replay of all this as the 4,500 dots disappear. In little more than an hour, nothing was flying over the U.S. The skies silent, a nation stunned. The air traffic control system still not back up to full speed. The FAA taking its time and fits and starts getting things open. Still some airports closed, of course, and we are watching that. Just one more point about United Airlines Flight 93. We know a little bit more about the alleged hijackers on board. Ziad Jarrah, who hails from Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, according to his family and according to investigative sources, spent some time in Afghanistan over the past couple of years, then went to Germany, and then ultimately to a pair of flight schools in South Florida. Investigators now believe he was the one on board United Flight 93, the one that crashed ultimately in Pennsylvania. He was the one likely to have seized control from the flight crew. Paula?
Thanks so much, Miles. I wanted now to sort of reprise a bit of what Reverend Billy Graham had to say yesterday as he spoke at the National Prayer Service that was held at the National Cathedral to kind of get his perspective, the perspective of a man of the cloth. And he spoke, "Thank you, Mr. President, for calling this day of prayer and remembrance. We needed it at this time. We come together today to affirm our conviction that God cares for us, whatever our ethnic, religious, or political background may be. No matter how hard we try, words simply cannot express the horror, the shock, and the revulsion we all feel over what took place in this nation on Tuesday morning. September 11th will go down in our history as a day to remember." We know that the horror of all of this has affected you all in very deep and individual ways. That is also true of the correspondents who have covered this story. They have been touched in quite distinct ways. John King, Bill Hemmer, Elizabeth Cohen, all have stories to share with us this morning about perhaps what has struck them in the deepest way. Let's start off with John. John, I know you probably haven't gotten any sleep since Tuesday, but as you reflect on what this country has gone through over the last 4 days or so, what comes to mind?
Well, a personal observation first, then I want to talk about the week, the President Bush, the changes in the president we have seen over the week. When they evacuated the White House just after that plane hit the Pentagon, we were running across Pennsylvania Avenue and stopped to look up. One of our producers, Tim McCann, pointed up to the sky. There was a 747 directly above the White House. That is restricted airspace. You never see airplanes in the sky there. It turned out that that was a government plane, scrambled as all this was happening, one of the quote-unquote doomsday planes, an operational command center the military can fly in the case of war. But it came over the White House and it banked back. And we stood there in Lafayette Park looking at each other thinking, oh my God. And it flew off to the side, and only then, through our cellular phone conversations, did we find out what had happened at the Pentagon and what was happening throughout the Capitol. So obviously a very frightening environment. At one point we were standing in the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue and Tim McCann yelled at me. He said, "Come back into the park." And I said, "I have to watch the building." And he said, "You know, you're not going to be able to file if you die." So that's why God created producers, I think, to tell us correspondents to use a little better judgment. So we went back to the other side of the park. But we will take some time to digest this. The country will and history will. But certainly we saw a very different president over the week. There was some controversy about why it took so long to get him back to Washington. When he did, of course, he delivered his first address to the American people from the Oval Office, telling them their government was up and running and that they were still investigating this. At that point, many thought the speech wasn't good enough. That is not the environment, whether you love or don't like this president, it's not the environment in which he is most comfortable. Over the next day, though, we saw the president use the words, "This is an act of war." Much more stern language about the investigation and retaliation. And the president has to juggle here. He has to be updated on the national security matters. He has to plan a potential military response. He also has to lead the nation. A very close parallel, I think, to what we saw, a defining moment of the Clinton presidency after the Oklahoma City bombing. So we saw President Bush in the National Cathedral yesterday, leading the nation in prayer. A very touching moment there, I think, when the president finished his remarks. He went back to sit down, and his father reached across Laura Bush and gave him a pat, an attaboy, if you will, from the 41st president to the 43rd president. And then the president, of course, went up to New York. This an atmosphere in which he is much more comfortable. Obviously, a very trying moment, seeing firsthand the depth of the deepest devastation up in New York, trying to give a pep talk, though, to those firefighters to keep them energized for the relief effort. A much more relaxed president here. You see him getting a fire hat here, a lot of glad handing and patting on the back, smiles. This, another role of the president, leading the nation in the recovery efforts, trying to keep the spirits high. Mr. Bush told reporters afterwards, though, he was quite struck here as he shook hands that many of the people voiced anger and wanted immediate retaliation. One thing he said this week, I think, says it all about what we have seen. This is a president who came into office with a very detailed domestic agenda. Now he said in this past week, I want the American people, I want you all to understand this. Fighting terrorism is now my mission. This has transformed my presidency. This was a week we were all going to be in Washington covering a very bitter partisan fight over the budget, over spending, over dipping into the Social Security surplus. All that is gone now. Bipartisanship is the word of the day in Washington. We'll see how long it lasts, but certainly with this crisis, deep bipartisanship, and a president who says he now has a singular mission for the remaining years of his first term. Paula?
Sean, I'd like to come back to you a little bit later on for some more, even more personal reflections. I wanted to bring Bill into the discussion now. Bill, I know you just came to New York City yesterday, and I guess what I would like to share is, as a New Yorker, you know, of course, these images are shocking. They are mind-numbing. They are almost impossible to erase from your mind. But I guess what I have been most struck by is what you're seeing there this morning. These New Yorkers that continue to line up to volunteer. Reports of, you know, from all of the area hospitals that workers have had to turn volunteers away. Even though they need the blood, they can't accommodate the vast amounts of people that are showing up to donate, people giving out free food, people sending in clothing and supplies. It really is quite remarkable that you would see this level of support in the wake of this horrific tragedy. What are you seeing there this morning?
Watching it for 3.5, 4 days from Atlanta, we were told about the spirit of New York, and Paula, it's quite evident, even in this early morning hour, just about before 9 a.m. East Coast time. I'm virtually in a sea of humanity here. We've seen thousands and thousands of people who have come here to show up strictly to volunteer their time and their efforts to offer some sort of help in this ongoing effort here. A couple things struck me, though, flying in last night. First of all, we left Atlanta. And you know, Hartsfield International Airport, the busiest airport in the world, flying to New York City at night with a flight that took about an hour and 45 minutes. We did not see a single airplane in the sky the entire way up here until we got to the New York area, and even then there were just a few airplanes that we could spot in different areas. That's one thing that struck me. The other thing, we came in at somewhat of a low altitude in the New York City area. From 40 miles away, Paula, we could see the smoke still billowing up and away from the World Trade Center, and the floodlights were still brilliant in the night sky last night. And it was the tallest thing that we could see on the horizon, and quite evident and quite clear about the devastation here. The other thing, talking to New Yorkers, our colleagues here who have come back to the city to help out with CNN throughout the week here, the one thing they say that strikes them is to come into this town and see the line, the skyline here, without those two World Trade Centers at the center buildings at the bottom end of the island. They say for them that was the very heart of what that skyline meant to them, and at this point that heart has been ripped out. But again, we're seeing the gathering here of not only attitude, but also of work, of the people who have come here to help out. And the donations are overwhelming. We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up here shortly, Paula.
In fact, Bill, I mentioned a little bit early on, the Emergency Service Department of New York is actually telling people, we got enough already, you know, we appreciate your help, but, you know, don't overload our system. Bill, we're going to come back to you in a little bit as well. Okay. Elizabeth Cohen is probably in a part of the city that no one really wants to venture to. That is where the families are gathering, trying to get information on loved ones. Elizabeth, describe to us what you have seen.
What I've seen is an incredible amount of human strength, Paula. I am just amazed at these people who have lost spouses, brothers, sisters, children who go from hospital to hospital. Some of them traipse the length of Manhattan, walk miles in a day to check out every hospital, and then to come down here to the Armory, which is the main place where people register their missing persons reports, and then also take a look at the lists of people who are in hospitals and lists of people who have been found deceased. I can't imagine how in that situation one would get out of bed, much less walk miles. They are truly amazing. They have been very energetic and persistent in getting the faces of their lost relatives on television. They really truly feel that if somehow they're seen, that someone might have noticed them. One person said perhaps he got out of the crash and he's wandering around confused, wandering around Lower Manhattan, and maybe someone's seen him. Someone else said, I heard there are a lot of John Does in hospitals. They're in comas. Nobody knows who they are. They're too confused to say their identity. Maybe my brother is one of those John Does. So the strength that they have and the hope that they have is just incredible. I mean, even today I've run into people who still have hope. I think it's waning. I think perhaps the reality is setting in, but people still do have hope, and that just amazes me.
John, you're still with me, right?
Yes, indeed.
I guess, and I certainly don't mean to ask this question in a self-serving way, but we have all been trained as journalists to separate ourselves from sometimes the content of what we're covering. And I know I've been asked a lot over the last 48 hours or the last 76 hours, what is it like as a human level, as an American, to cover this? Isn't it all but impossible not to feel the pain and the horror of what so many thousands of Americans have experienced?
It's impossible not to feel the pain and the horror, especially as we run into colleagues who know people who worked at the Pentagon or know people in New York City. One of our producers had a college friend who's still missing up there in New York, and so it's hard not to feel the pain and the horror. At the same time, we have to be very careful in what we do. One of our challenges right now, the White House tells us that there's a continuing threat, so they're asking us to be very careful about what we say about where the president is at any given time, how he is traveling. So we need to be careful about that, and I believe we have a responsibility to do so. I think we can remain objective in our coverage of this, not only here in Washington, but up in New York, around the country, and indeed around the world. We can, I believe, remain objective in our coverage and be fair to all parties involved here, but still just show a little good judgment and a little common sense. We get access to the president and we get access to information because we have the privilege of covering the White House, and I consider it a great privilege regardless of who is the president of the United States. We get access because of that privilege, and I believe with that comes responsibility to show good judgment.
I absolutely agree with you, John, and I know the mayor of New York City implored us yesterday to exercise the kind of caution you are talking about. But if you would, and I'll share some of my thoughts with you on this, explain to the folks who are joining us this morning what it is like to be in the middle of a breaking news story where, in fact, you do have to sift through conflicting information. Haven't there been many occasions in the last several days where you simply have not gone with something that a source gave you because you couldn't confirm it?
Absolutely. We have a simple rule in journalism, and certainly here at CNN, on most matters that are sensitive and that we are getting stuff from sources, anonymous sources. If we can go on the air and say the president says or the Secretary of State says, it's a no-brainer. They said it, it's on the record. On a source matter, if it is sensitive, especially if it casts aspersions on somebody, we have a responsibility to double-check and in some cases to triple-check. So there are things I could say right now that have been told to me in this past week that I simply won't say because we don't know them to be true. And in a breaking situation, and I believe our people have tried to be as responsible as possible, there is often conflicting information. And so we have to say to our viewers, here is what we know right now, and please bear with us. In a situation like this, the information often changes. People report things that they believe to be true that turn out not to be true. We need to be careful, and that's sometimes hard because you're running around frantically. Often, in this case, we were reporting as we were being told to get away from the White House, and as the Secret Service, carrying automatic machine guns, was pushing us back across Lafayette Park. Now, they were doing that because of concerns for our safety. Paula?
All right, thanks, John. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on, as well as Bill Hemmer and Elizabeth Cohen. Right now, we wanted to give you an idea of how Americans have gotten their information since that brutal Tuesday morning. It appears as though many of you are getting your information from television. Jeannie Mose has that story.
If you're watching this story, you may already be hooked, horrified, yet mesmerized by planes aimed at buildings. Buildings that collapse before our very eyes over and over.
I can't really take my eyes off the TV.
And I also couldn't stand to watch TV one more minute.
Attack on America, attack on America, America under attack, whatever the networks call it.
It's addicting. I think it's addicting partly because we don't want to miss something.
Even if that something makes us sad.
I cry a lot when I hear the stories and see all the people.
If anybody see my daughter.
I think people feel guilty if they're not watching it. You know, that they feel in some way that they're betraying those that have really suffered.
You feel like you're participating because you're watching? That's an illusion.
What's not an illusion is the way the coverage tends to unite viewers in a shared experience, even if what's shared is sorrow. It's easy to OD on Crisis TV.
I don't want to watch it all the time, just because it kind of deadens the mind.
So how much is too much? We asked Dr. Jimmy Holland, head of the Department of Psychiatry at Sloan Kettering.
Everybody should ask themselves, is this making me feel better or feel worse? And if it